and welcome to the Lasso the Moon podcast. I'm Bryce McCracken.
I am crystal ball falling at a large speed to bring in the new year.
Were you underprepared for this?
I didn't think about the silly thing that I wanted to say. We're filming on New Year's Eve. I'm Brett Redshaw, talking about our top 10 movies of the year.
Yeah, it's currently 1:30 p.m., December 31st, and if you are a longtime listener of this show, you will know our first ever episode was January 1st of 2023, and we did the top 10 movies of 2022. And again, if you've been following the podcast, you know we haven't been here for a while. All three of us, me, Brett, and Wyatt, went through some pretty major life changes all around the same time, and it was pretty difficult to all find overlapping time to record podcasts. But we have still been seeing movies. We're still big movie boys. That has not changed, and we have a lot of movies that we're very excited to talk about. So like Brett said, we're going to be doing our top 10 movies of the year. Brett, did you, I know both of us saw less movies this year, but
certainly
did you, at least less movies than last year, but did you still feel like you were out a lot at the movies? Did you feel like the quality of the movies was where it was at last year? Was there any improvement, any decline? What were your thoughts?
I definitely did not make it out as much as I wanted to. And I found myself being so busy this year. Basically, one of the new changes that Bryce was talking about is that I got a brand new job that requires me to be giving up a lot more of my kind of personal time. Basically, I don't work remotely anymore, and so it used to be really easy to sit at home and throw on a movie that was new and we wanted to see, or, you know, I would finish my day.
That's time theft.
Certainly. Oh, no, I meant at the end of the day.
I'm just kidding.
Wink, wink. I never did any time theft ever for my future employers who are listening to this. I found myself a lot more available in previous years for us to be able to consume content together. And now I'll get home after an 8-hour day and want to do nothing but like lay face down into my pillow.
And we're both very extroverted people, so our social schedules are also quite packed all the time.
Yeah, that laying down on my pillow was just enough to get my social battery going, and then we'd go out the door to go bowling or play poker or, you know, go to a bar with friends. So there wasn't so much time, as well as I found myself much less interested in like the overall general slate of movies that came out over the course of the year. Both of us love going to see movies. It doesn't even really matter that much the quality of the movies that we were going to see. We'll still go see them anyway. We saw a lot of really bad movies last year and a couple this year as well. But it didn't really matter. We would just go regardless. And I couldn't the combination of like me not being able to find the care for what was coming out on top of being very busy just like clashed so badly that I didn't go out as much as I wanted to. With that being said, like the last 2 months felt like a superstar roster of movies that
it's been ridiculous.
I have never seen before, that I've been so excited to get into movies that like if you would have asked me the quality of the overall year of films at like August, I would have said like this was so bad, mid beyond belief year for movies. And then we got to the end and I'm looking at my list and I can't believe how passionate I am about the movies that are on here, the ones that got in just at the final stretch.
Yeah, I saw, I think, upwards of 80 movies last year, and it was in the 60s for the year prior. But exactly like you, I'm looking at my list of, we're doing top 10s, but I made 20. And my top 20 for this year, last year, and the year prior will be on my Letterboxd. That will be in the description for this episode. We'll throw Brett's in there too if you want to check his out. But looking at my top 20, there are genuinely like probably 23, 24 movies that I can say that came out this year that I really, really liked. And when it came down to making a top 10, I actually like really, really struggled for like the 9 through 15 range. You'll see like my especially my 10 on my list is like definitely a bit of a hot take. But that was largely because it was like there were 5 or 6 movies that it was clear I was very passionate about and I loved a lot that I was not going to have a chance to talk about at length at all this year on this podcast. And so my my list is a little bit unique. There might be some hot takes in there, but I'm excited to go over it.
I feel almost equally excited to talk about honorable mentions as I do the actual top 10 list, because obviously we don't have all the time to just go over every single movie that we saw. But there's so many movies that just almost made the cut into the top 10 that, I don't know, they're all great.
Yeah, and if that's like how you gauge the quality of a year for movies in terms of just like there are this many movies that came out this year that I'm really passionate about or I think are really successful, I definitely think this is a much better year. Especially, I mean, definitely a better year than last year, but especially the 2 years prior than that, like since you and I have been really into movies. Since that, arguably since probably 2019, this is probably the best, most stacked year for movies, and that's really exciting. And I just want to take a second before we get into the list to thank you, listener, for your support over this first year. We love you very much. We're very grateful. The first 6 months of this year, we were working very hard on this podcast, and it was a lot of fun. And honestly, we just did it for ourselves. Brett and I just like to talk about movies, and we wanted to create a platform that we could do that and share those conversations with people. And seeing that there are people that actually like really enjoy listening to us talk about movies and have us as their most listened to podcast
60
on Spotify.
Or so, I want to say, had us as number one podcast, if I remember correctly.
No, it wasn't that high. But
in my heart, it was that high.
In Brett's heart, there were 60 people that had us as as their favorite podcast of the year, and we're very grateful for that. So yeah, I don't necessarily have a plan for where this is going to go in the future. I've got a lot of ideas bouncing around in my head, and a lot of it's going to come down to where I land on my feet job-wise, because that was my big change. I actually lost my job and really just threw my whole life for a loop. So yeah, your support means the world. And without further ado, let's get into our top 10/top 20 movies of the year. The way that this is going to work, Brett and I are each going to give our top 10 movies that we have made. The title of this episode might say top 10 best, might just say top 10. Regardless, it is impossible to quantify best movies of the year, so we're not really going to be doing that.
We don't review movies on this podcast. We just talk about them.
We just talk about them. These are the movies that we found to be the most successful and we enjoyed the most. Likely some combination of objective quality of filmmaking and then also just a lot of personal taste and what worked for us. So the way that this is going to work, if you saw our top 10 episode last year, it's going to be a little bit different. Brett and I are going to give our top 10s starting at 10. We'll have Brett go first. He'll give it his 10th favorite movie of the year. If that is a movie that I share somewhere on my list, I'm still going to talk about it, but I won't reveal exactly when or where that is on my list until it gets there. So that'll leave some element of suspense for our lists. Brett and I have not seen each other's lists, so hopefully we are just as surprised as you are. That being said, Brett and I do have a lot of overlapping movie taste, and we live together, so we did see a lot of movies together.
I'll tell you right now, actually, I was just going to say for the 10th movie that I have to talk about, or the first movie, it's the only one that I know for a fact that you haven't seen.
Oh, love that.
So I'm excited to talk about that number 10, but then the rest of it, we've all, overlapped together, because literally every other one we've seen together.
Yes.
So.
And before we get into these lists, I am just going to rapid fire some movies that I've been seeing on a lot of top 10 lists, or these movies were really well reviewed this year. But as far as I'm aware, these are movies that both Brett and I did not get a chance to see. So if you don't see these on our lists, that would be why. Rapid fire. John Wick Chapter 4, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Godzilla -1, Dream Scenario, Passages, Godland, The Taste of Things, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, How to Have Sex. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds good. Rye Lane and Fallen Leaves. Correct me if I'm wrong. You haven't seen any of those.
No, I do know what sex is. I'll tell you later.
Okay. I will appreciate that in due time. But let's get into these lists. Yeah, were there any surprises on your list? Like anything that when you started throwing your list together, you didn't really expect to see that make an appearance, or maybe don't tell us what those are, but you got any hot takes?
I would say I have one hot take. No, two hot takes of movies that I know that people did not love. In fact,
Interesting.
sometimes I've heard vehemently hate.
That's very exciting.
That are both in my not only top 5, in my top 3.
Wow.
So I'm excited to talk about those. And then there's at least one movie that I'm excited to talk about that I really, really enjoyed whenever I saw it initially. And then whenever I was actually pulling the list together and thinking about what I really liked one over another, this movie I was like, I forgot how much I loved this, and I feel like this is like a flawless film. And it might be surprising which one that is.
Oh, boy.
What about you?
Yeah, I've definitely got some hot takes. Nothing that I think is like egregious, like nothing that was like a hated movie by any means, but there are some lauded movies that I think people will be surprised to not see in my top 10. And then additionally, definitely a couple movies that I think people won't expect to see in a top 10. But ultimately, that's kind of like what makes these lists fun, like these personal lists, because everyone has like their own subjective taste. Everyone has their own niche. And I feel like a lot of my favorite movies ever I've found through like conversations with people and just learning what is that movie that like really hits home with you. And then sometimes you have those overlapping tastes. And so
we were talking about this the other day. Neither one of us watch trailers, or at least we avoid trailers as best as possible, just because we follow the industry. We know what we want to see. And I was having a conversation with somebody about that, and they couldn't wrap their head around, like, you watch movies all the time and you never watch a trailer. How do you know what? How do you know what's good? I just kind of see everything as much as I can.
Yep.
I'll get started. How about that? Number 10 for Brett is Matt Johnson's Blackberry.
Very exciting.
I watched Blackberry this year. I watched it through a series of lunch breaks at my job. Came home and told Bryce how excited I was to see this movie. I think I finished it at home one day because I started it and then I couldn't get enough. I was really excited about this and was happy that it made it all the way onto my top 10 because I wanted to talk about it so badly. It stars Jay Baruchel, Matt Johnson, who's also the director of the film, and a very personal favorite of mine, Glenn Howerton. I'm a big Always Sunny fan. He plays Dennis in the critically acclaimed TV show. Very angry man. And that does not stop in this movie. I know that like the director just was like, who can I get to scream the best? And he found him. And I'm so glad that he did the role because he has an excellent role in this movie. It is so perfectly casted. It's a story about the BlackBerry, as per the title, the meteoric rise and the meteoric fall of the BlackBerry, kind of a warning about practices of business and what to do, how they compare against the other businesses that didn't fail the way that they did, the way that we all know that they did. There is somebody for me who's interested in technology and who we're young, but we're not that young. I remember the BlackBerry and how it related to the iPhone. There's Apple plays a big role. Steve Jobs plays a big role in this movie. And that's really, it's a cool retrospective to see this story that is so rarely told. Matt Johnson is Canadian and BlackBerry is a Canadian company. A lot of people didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time. So
Waterloo, Canada.
Kind
of middle of nowhere. Like 45 minutes outside Toronto.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Research in Motion is the company that made the BlackBerry, which is still to this day like one of the most well-respected companies in the country, as I understand it. I'm not from there, but these are things that I've heard. I describe it as like Canadian social network, where it is social networky in the sense of like this is young industry coming up and these innovators. It is not so like sharp cutting edge, but it's a little bit more intense at times. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie a lot.
Did you say I hadn't seen this movie?
I thought you didn't see this movie.
No,
did you see it?
I did end up. You talked so highly of it. I did end up watching it.
I didn't know that. We didn't talk about it.
Maybe it was because of this. Yeah, I did really enjoy BlackBerry. It is not on my list. I did find there were two like pretty decent like business success story movies that came out this year. The other one was Air. I did like Blackberry a lot more than Air, I think. But comparing it to The Social Network, I think you have to, just because it's like, oh, this is the start of a company. But The Social Network has it's such an exception because it feels so like prescient for today. Like I watched that movie 2 or 3 times this year, The Social Network, and every time I watch it, I find another piece where I'm like, oh, that is like so applicable to the world today, even though this movie is pretty old. And there's always so much for me to think about every time I watch The Social Network, and I didn't necessarily find that to be the case in Blackberry. I don't want to spend too much time on like why it didn't work for me, because ultimately I did really, really enjoy it. Jay Baruchel's performance was really good. It was really funny, like a lot funnier than I was expecting.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun just watching what's his name yell the entire movie. There was a very fun tie to the Pittsburgh Penguins that I was not expecting. Yeah, I liked this movie a lot. If you're into like based on a true story business world type movies, I think this is like without a doubt the best one this year. I liked it a lot.
Do you keep an all-time list?
I used to. I had a top 50 going for a while, but it literally changed constantly, so I just deleted it.
I think 50 is a lot to keep track of all the time. I keep a top 30, and I think Social Network is at 3. So, like, I compare the two because, like you said, they have to be comped. Like, there's no way around it. But to be clear, like, even though this is number 10 for me, it really doesn't hold a candle in terms of, like, quality and how much I enjoy it, but I really did like Blackberry.
Like you're copying the best movie of all time, basically. So it's like even a portion of the greatness that is The Social Network.
I don't know what this has anything to do with Ant-Man Quantumania, but
the greatest film of all time.
Yeah,
I mean, that was my personal favorite of the year, and I'm sure it was yours. We'll get there in due time. But yeah, Blackberry, Brett's number 2, 10. Brett's
10.
number 10.
Yes, sir.
My number 10.
Oh, I'm so sorry. One more time. I don't know if you got streaming notes. You can still watch.
Yes.
I almost said The Social Network. You can still watch Blackberry on Amazon Prime.
Cool. Yeah, we're going to try to mention where you can watch any of these movies, because we recommend them. We think it would be great that you watch them, and I think it will also improve your enjoyment of listening to this podcast if you get a chance. But yeah, my number 10 movie of the year. This one's definitely a bit of a hot take. I was stuck between this and like 5 other movies, but I went with like a Bryce play. This is Infinity Pool. Did you get a chance to watch this one?
No,
with me,
I
Brett?
regret that I did not see Infinity Pool. I know a lot about it, I feel, but didn't get a chance to.
Yeah, this is Brandon Cronenberg. He's a horror director, and more notably, probably the son of famed horror director David Cronenberg. This is his most recent movie. I have not seen either of their work a whole lot, but if there is one thing that I know from the few movies that I have seen from the pair of them, they make really fucked up movies. And it's a lot of fun if they do it well. This is definitely my favorite horror movie of this year. It follows a couple taking a vacation to a third world country where they have a uniquely demented way of punishing the criminals that are visiting this country. It stars Alexander Skarsgård and the Scream Queen, Mia Goth.
Yes, sir.
2 years in a row, Mia Goth representation on the Lasso the Moon top 10 list. Wyatt had Pearl in his number 2 spot last year, I think. Always thought that was pretty wild, but Pearl's a great movie. Mia Goth is excellent.
That's why we had the podcast, to bring you guys our honest takes.
Exactly. Yeah, this is, I think, without a doubt, my favorite of Mia Goth's performances. It is just absolutely insane, completely demented. She's electric, though. Like, you truly cannot take your eyes off of her in this movie. Yeah, it's really disorienting. There's a lot of like trippy visuals, and it starts off almost like this like beautiful vacation movie. And everything turns pretty quickly. It has a lot to say on the exploitation of third world countries and all of that, but that's not really at the forefront of this movie. It's really just a really fun time. I saw this one by myself at like 10:30 at night in the theaters, and It was one of the few movies that like actually disturbed me, and I was thinking about a lot on the way home. Yeah, if you're into horror, if you're into surreal horror specifically, I highly recommend Infinity Pool. It's streaming on, it is streaming on Hulu.
Very nice. That brings us to my number 9. This is a movie that Bryce and I saw together, just like every other movie that I'm about to say. May, December. From
Brett, I'm going to
filmmaker
interrupt
Todd
you.
Haynes. Your number 9?
My number 9 is May, December.
Wow, so exciting.
Wow.
I think we had a couple of those last year as
Yes,
well that
we
just
did.
happened to be right in the right spot. May, December is Todd Haynes' slice of life melodrama. It stars Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore, and Charles Melton, which is kind of insane. Like, I did not know about Charles Melton, like Euphoria's dream boy.
Me neither.
I had never seen Euphoria. You'd never seen
Yeah.
Euphoria. I think I saw like an episode or two. But I did not realize that he's like very beloved, and he's just kind of like building his portfolio with this new movie. Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, already that's just stupid that you have them together. And then you have like the rising young star, Charles Melton, who is, he's on pace for getting at the very least an Oscar nomination. Really come together to make an awesome movie. You get to see a kind of intertwining of lives in this movie. Different people acting different performances for different purposes.
You want to say
In
what
the
this movie's
movie,
about before you go in too much
I'm
about
trying
that?
to say not too much.
Yeah, I have a brief, like, so all this is Natalie Portman plays an actress who is making a movie about Julianne Moore's character's life. She's playing her in a movie.
It's a very good way to boil it down.
She has Julianne Moore's character has a very complicated backstory. So it kind of explores that as Natalie Portman like learns more and more about who Julianne Moore's character is as a person and what led her to make the decisions that she might have made. Yeah, go ahead, Brett. I interrupted
That's
you.
all right. Well, it's both of our movies,
That's
so we
true.
both have to have some time here to talk. That's a good boiling down of the plot. The overall tone of the movie is generally serious, but has some really like uplifting, not uplifting, but it has comedic moments.
I would say campy is actually the best way to describe it.
I would actually agree. Yeah, campy. It's definitely campy. I've heard other people talk about seeing the movie in theaters. We watched it at home, where they referenced some jokes that are like, actually to us, it was like gut busting jokes that nobody in the theaters laughed at. Not because they weren't funny, but because they didn't understand the camp that was being had. So if you have an eye for that kind of thing and you like camp, there's a lot to really enjoy in the movie. Also, just a really engaging story about trauma and childhood and relationships that is worth a watch.
Yeah, one thing that this movie did exceptionally well, in my opinion, as just a straight drama, like there's not a whole lot plot-wise that happens in this movie. It's really just conversations between people. But Todd Haynes does such a good job of creating every moment of this movie. You're asking questions. Like you want to know more about this relationship and what their dynamic looks like. You want to know more about each of these people and what their backstory is and how they got to where they're at right now. You want to know more about every single plot line, like every thread that gets sewn. You want to like see that to its completion because you have to know like where this is going and where the people are going to end up. And so I like, even though it's just a drama, I was on the edge of my seat pretty much the whole time. It was pretty much fully like encapsulating. Like I was totally in on this one, and yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, the writing is very good in a way that keeps you wanting to know more. Almost in like they don't give you all of the information immediately, and you kind of it almost has some air of like a mystery. What are they even talking about here? And we won't say what that is because you should go see the movie that yourself. Yes. It's still streaming on Netflix. You should go give it a watch.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that was both of our number 9s, May, December.
So I guess I should do 8,
go ahead.
right?
Why not?
So my number 8, one half of Barbenheimer.
Which half?
Barbie.
Wow, there it is.
Brought to you by filmmaker Greta Gerwig, also in writing partnership with the man Noah Baumbach. Acting in this film is Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, and America Ferrera, among more. There's a really big cast of players here, but those are the three who I would consider leads. We all know about Barbie, right? It was the biggest phenomenon, at least half of the biggest phenomenon, arguably like the more impactful among our generation as far as like the cultural mainstream goes between them and Oppenheimer. Although I wish I would have gotten some box office numbers. I want to say that Oppenheimer actually did better. More people went and saw Oppenheimer just from a box office perspective.
Is that true?
I don't want to say for sure.
True.
If you want to look it up while I'm talking about it more, that would be fine.
Absolutely.
But Barbie is this kind of pseudo comedy and perspective on capitalism and feminism and all these heady ideas boxed into like a very marketable comedic package that everybody wanted to go see because it was all over social media. It was on our social media. We went dressed up as both Oppenheimer and Barbie characters to go see the movie.
That was the last time we recorded an episode together.
Was it really?
Yeah, July 27th.
Banger. Banger. And the run that we had there for a little while. The movie is, in my opinion, impeccable at many, many parts, genuinely terrible at others, which is really tough for me to talk about. Like, I'm so sad by that.
Yeah.
Because
you don't even have to here if you don't want to too much, because it's a great movie.
It is a great movie. It has to be said that like there's producer influence on this movie that made some parts genuinely awful. And like as a huge fan of Greta, just ripped my heart out that she didn't have like full creative control over the movie, because
you could feel her toes getting stepped on a little bit.
You could feel every part of where she had full influence over this movie just shined and soared above everything else. And then there were those moments that Mattel had their hands in that everybody else, every like film critic that I've heard of talk about this movie, was very clear to everybody else. This just did not sit right with me. And so unfortunately it even though it is at 8, like it still is like done very well in my list. It had this like potential to be at this upper echelon for me that I fear that it's just not really ever going to get into. Like at the moment after seeing the movie, I was really excited. Like I wanted to see it again. And as the time has gone past and I've thought about those flaws more and more, the less I feel that I want to come back and revisit it. I'm sure at some point I'm going to, but like there is kind of and I'm going to definitely talk about this with other movies. There's kind of a box where I keep movies that are very, very special to me that I felt like Barbie could have been in, and it's just not going to end up getting there for me. But still a great movie that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I loved this movie as well. It's one of my honorable mentions. I have a feeling all of my criticisms of this movie are exactly the same as Brett's, but I think they may have just done a little bit more negatively for me than it did for Brett, which is not to say that it ruined my experience. I still loved this movie. It's in my top 20 of the year. But yeah, Greta Gerwig absolutely shines. This movie honestly completely shocked me. Like, I had a lot of fear going into it that it would all just feel like a big Mattel ad. And it has those moments, but at the end of the day, like this is a movie with a real heartbeat that like really captures something about specifically femininity, but it often points the relationship between femininity and masculinity. Like it really feels like it has its finger on the heartbeat of sort of like what culture is about right now. And I was not really expecting that at all. I cried a lot in the movie theater the day that we saw Barbie and Oppenheimer, several times in both. And I was not expecting that.
Bryce is a multi-film crier, or multi-moment single film crier.
Yes, I will cry.
Genuinely, I find impressive.
But yeah, this movie, I look forward to probably watching it again when it gets its Oscar nominations, because I'll want to catch back up. But yeah, I love this movie. Very, very entertaining. Everyone's seen it already. It's almost no point in us recommending it. But yeah, this is where we have Barbie, in case you guys were wondering.
But it is streaming on Max.
Exclusively,
I believe. If you did want to see it, haven't gotten to it yet. Also, I just have a final note. Greta is a god amongst men. That's all.
I can't wait. I truly cannot wait for her Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe adaptation.
I
Is she
can't
just
wait.
doing the first one?
No,
she's
she
doing
has,
Narnia.
She has, I believe, a contract for 3 movies.
That's very exciting.
At least, like it's definitely multiple.
That's very exciting. Yeah, moving on. My number 8. This was another like pretty big surprise for me this year. That is Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. Again, this was like one of the biggest surprises for me this year, especially after Elvis last year was one of my least favorite movies of the year. I have absolutely no relationship to Elvis or this story. I'm not really an Elvis fan. I like the hits, of course, but I have never seen any of his movies. I don't really care about the figure that is Elvis. And then last year we got the terrible Elvis movie, and it really soured my taste towards all things in this vein. But when I saw Priscilla was coming out and Sofia Coppola was behind it, I was hesitant but excited, and I would say it absolutely exceeded all of my expectations. This movie follows Kaylee Spaney as Priscilla Presley, the wife of Elvis Presley, who is played by Jacob Elordi. And it just follows throughout their life and their relationship up until the time of their divorce. This movie did a lot for me. It was truly like the polar opposite to Elvis last year's maximalism. Everything here is like understated. It's all under the surface. It never really hits you over the head with anything that it's trying to say, which is like honestly Sofia Coppola's like gift. Like that is what she is so good at doing. All of her movies that I've seen are very understated and kind of hit at this weird part of your emotions that aren't usually accessed by film. At least that's my experience. She does an excellent job making you feel everything that Kaylee Spaney's Priscilla character is feeling. Like you feel just as drawn to Jacob Elordi's Elvis as she does. Like you get why she would become totally wrapped up in who he is as a person, and you get why she would throw her whole life away as like a 17-year-old. And you get why even throughout their tumultuous relationship, why she holds on to him. Truly, like this movie had some of my favorite production design of the year. There's a lot of care put into every single frame of this movie. And the biggest thing for me, like it's clearly just so empathetic for its titular figure in Priscilla. Like it's clear to me that Sofia Coppola was like emotionally impacted by the book that this is based on and by the real Priscilla Presley story.
Who was pretty heavily involved in the work.
Yes. And she taps into something here, again, like Barbie, where it really feels like it understands the way that, less so the world, but more so like relationships work and power dynamics in relationships, especially between men and women, often work. And I unfortunately saw a lot of threads of past relationships that I've had in this movie, and I was really impacted by it.
Were you Elvis in those situations?
I was, yes, unfortunately. I don't mean to be.
Were you sitting up in bed reading like ancient religious texts?
Yes, just like that. I was forcing beautiful women to pray in circles around me while my wife watched in pain.
My child bride.
Yes. All of these things are real things that happened to both me and Elvis Presley. But no, this movie, like I said, I was shocked by how much I liked it. I really didn't think that I would like it as much as I ended up liking it. Yeah, if it sounds at all like something that you would enjoy, I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah, we saw Priscilla together. I wouldn't say that it quite hit home for me the same way that it did for Bryce. I'm actually pretty surprised that it got so far up.
That's fair.
Your list, but
yeah.
I'm glad that it did, so we have a little bit of diversity between our lists here. But yeah, that's awesome. Definitely, I liked whenever Jacob Elordi got into that excavator and then tore down a house. That rocked.
I'm like fully on the Jacob Elordi train this year. I knew of him. I had seen him in, he was like a background character in Deep Waters, which was not a very successful movie that I saw last year. But I was like, oh, he's like doing something here that I like. But after Priscilla and Saltburn this year, I'm like, oh, I get it. Like this guy rocks.
This is my first delve into Jacob Elordi. I'm not gonna lie, I did not know who this person was before I saw Priscilla.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
but I it's funny. Like the second that it's one of those things where like you hear something for the first time and suddenly you see it everywhere because your mind is on it now. The second that I saw Priscilla, it was like every single like men's fashion thing that I saw on Instagram was Jacob Elordi and Timothy Chalamet.
Yep.
And I'm not mad about it. I don't know anything about the person, but he's a good actor. Like I can't deny that. He's a very attractive,
very
man.
pretty
guy to look at. Can't lie. All right, number 7 for Brett is Poor Things. Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things, starring Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo, Willem Dafoe, and Rami Youssef. I bring up Rami Youssef because I was really excited to talk about him. I don't know, Bryce, if you know anything about Rami Youssef, but he's somebody that I followed for a while because I think during 2020, when we were all locked down, I watched a lot of TV with one of our other mutual friends, and Rami was one of the shows that he watched. It was Rami's like written, directed show. Have you ever seen it before? Are you like
no? I'm not really familiar with him at all.
The show is excellent.
Okay.
And I would really highly recommend that. And so like as soon as it was so like it was so captivating to me, the work that he did on his own show, that like I followed him personally for a while, and then I saw that he was in this movie that I was really excited about. So it was just from a personal perspective,
that's awesome.
Very much a delight to see him on screen, as well as one of my favorite actors of all time, Willem Dafoe. And Emma Stone, frankly, is way up there for me too. They're all amazing, give great performances in the movie. It's hard to sum up. It's hard to sum up what Poor Things actually is because it falls under a lot of categories. It's a feminist film, science fiction. It's comedic. It follows a lot of motifs of different genres. Ultimately, I would say that it's a comedy because I laughed more than anything else in the movie. And maybe laughed more than just about any other movie I've been in all year. It is seriously hilarious at sometimes. And like I said, from a performance perspective, Emma Stone and Mark Ruffalo, they're the two leads of the movie. And they just absolutely kill it. I've never seen Mark Ruffalo.
Weird performances.
Very weird performances. I've never seen Mark Ruffalo be like that funny before. I don't know. There might be like a hole in my Mark Ruffalo experiences. I don't know if he's ever done something so comedic, but the thing that really stuck out with me was like physical comedy in a way that I've not seen in a movie in years. Like I can't even really think of something that's comparable, which is something that you find like a lot in this movie. It is completely unique. It's the first Yorgos Lanthimos movie that I've seen. I know that a lot of people are a big fan of The Lobster. And I know that the guy just makes weird movies, right? And this is not an exception. It's very strange. But it is such an endearing movie that was really funny to me all the way through. Has a message that is important to hear. It's not anything that like I think hasn't been said before. Like it is very much like women powerful good, men can be stupid and bad. Awesome. But it's not.
It feels more complex than that, though.
It definitely feels more complex than that, and it's not ever so unself-aware of what the movie actually is. Like it knows that it's very simple and it's funny, but has something important to say. It just all around was just like very competent, very solid movie that is definitely going to stick with me for a while. I could see it even moving its way further up my list in later years.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this movie. It's one of my honorable mentions. I did not have a huge relationship to Yorgos Lanthimos. I had seen The Lobster, but it was one of the first movies I watched in like 2016, 2017 when I was first getting into movies. And I think, frankly, it went over my head. And I've been waiting to do like a deep dive in all of his movies because I think stylistically I really like him. I loved Poor Things. It was very funny. It did a really good job of contrasting like some of the most beautiful filmmaking, some of the funniest lines on one hand over here, and then on this hand, some of the most like disgusting, like thematically, like not just disgusting visually, like there's some gore in this movie, but like disgusting morally things in this movie that kind of turn your stomach. And it's a really, really cool contrast. I loved all the performances. I definitely think I want to see this again to like gauge it a little bit more because there was just a lot going on and it's a very strange movie.
Well said. I agree with all of it.
On my number 7, we have The Other Half of Barbenheimer, Oppenheimer. I frankly wanted this movie to be a little bit higher on my list, but I did have some issues with it, which were not glaring in any way. Even like the parts of this movie that I didn't find as successful, I still think were very good. And I think that speaks to how much I love the next 6 movies on my list, because I truly did love Oppenheimer. It impacted me very emotionally. If you don't know, if somehow you missed it, this is Christopher Nolan's newest smash hit. All of his movies make money. This one was no exception. It was the 3rd highest grossing movie this year, behind Super Mario Brothers at 2 and Barbie at 1.
I know that. That's so funny.
Barbie did outgross it, but yeah. Oppenheimer.
What are the numbers there? How close is the margin?
It's pretty substantial. Do you want worldwide or domestic?
Give me both.
Worldwide, Barbie made 1.4 billion, 636 million. Oppenheimer made 952 million, so it didn't quite crack the billion worldwide. And then 326 million domestic.
I had heard that it did go over $1 billion, or at least maybe I was thinking about they thought that it was on track for going over $1 billion. I'm pretty surprised to hear that it didn't, but
it's always hard to gauge the success of movies anymore with streaming deals and everything.
Fair.
Like it's impossible to quantify like how many people are actually seeing movies and how much money that is making for the people that made it. But yeah, Oppenheimer, everyone saw it for the most part.
But in retrospect, I can say like with 100% certainty, like even though there's like a meme here and there about Oppenheimer that you still see, like Barbie's still the dominant force between the two in terms of like pushing conversation about movie.
Yeah.
Like they were both together, and then I think that it very clearly separated where, you know, a month or two down the line after they were released, like Barbie really still like it kept that momentum in a way that Oppenheimer couldn't quite.
And frankly, the two worked off of each other. Like the two would not have been so successful if it weren't for their like weird polarity that drew everyone into, let's make Barbenheimer a thing. Let's make this weekend an event. I absolutely loved going to see these movies in costume and seeing how packed the theater was. Everyone was there for one of those two movies, and it was awesome. It was just really cool seeing like film being at the center of film conversation and just popular conversation again. So that was awesome.
I was telling people that it was my Super Bowl, and then I was doing that. I said that like 2 or 3 times, and then I remembered like I'm a very big football fan and realized that I also have my own
Super Bowl. Is your
so,
Super Bowl?
Yeah, my Super Bowl too.
This was a great weekend for us. I did find Oppenheimer a little bit more successful as a movie. I did enjoy it a little bit more, which is not to say I think one is great and one's not. I think they're both awesome. But if somehow you don't know, Oppenheimer is all about J. Robert Oppenheimer's role in the development of the first atomic bomb during World War II. It stars a ridiculous cast of people, including, all right, deep breath, Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Florence Pugh, and literally like so many more people that just kind of show up and have maybe 10 minutes of on-screen time, maybe just a few lines, but every person kills it. I don't really know what I was expecting from this movie, but it wasn't this. I'm very familiar with Nolan's movies now. He already was one of my favorite directors because he was my dad's favorite director, and I kind of just grew up with a familiarity to his movies. And before Oppenheimer came out, and I went back and watched all of the movies that I had missed, and I have a ranking of his movies on my Letterboxd again if you want to check those out. But if there's one thing that he's known for doing in his movies, it is putting spectacle above plot, above characters. And while I still feel like you could maybe levy that criticism at this movie, I think it was far more concerned with the message of the movie and the character being Oppenheimer at the center of the movie, and the torment and the pain and the confusion and the drive and the like passion and the intelligence that this guy feels. Like I truly did not expect him to write this character as fleshed out and as complex and as deep as he did. a lot of that I think falls on Cillian Murphy's performance, which I think is exceptional. I hope it gets recognition at the Oscars because I think it deserves it. Robert Downey Jr. also in this movie as a secondary character is exceptional. He kind of carries the energy of the entire back half of the movie, and he is wonderful. And that being said, like even though it's less concerned with the spectacle than a lot of Nolan's movies, it certainly still delivers. Brett and I got a chance to see this in IMAX with the Dolby surround sound, and it was amazing. Totally blew me out of my seat. There were some incredible visuals. Specifically the run up to the Trinity test, the first explosion, and then sort of the fallout emotionally of that like hour run in the movie is probably my favorite hour of any movie this year. I thought it was all pretty exceptional. It's so grand. It covers a ton thematically, morally, personally. And it never feels like it undersells any of it. Like it really shoots for the stars with everything. It's got like a 3-hour runtime. Like it takes big swings, and I truly feel like it's successful in all of them, which I did not expect from Christopher Nolan. So yeah, this movie really worked for me. It deserved its 3-hour runtime. I cried literally like 3 times in this movie. What the hell is that? Yeah, I loved it. That's my number 7 of the year.
I want to point out that 2023, from a personal perspective, was one of the better years, if not the best year that I can remember in recent memory for biopics, which normally, for me, like snooze fest, I could not care less about biopics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I want to know more about this person, I will read a book. That's fine. Like, tell me like an exceptional story that I don't know. Like, one of the criticisms with even making this a story in the first place is like, well, we know what happens, right? We know the end, so all the tension building that's going to be a part of the plot is kind of a non-factor.
Yes.
But this movie, among with others, just maybe changed my perspective a little bit on the biopic. There were a lot of really good ones this year. 3 in my top 15.
Awesome.
4 in my
crazy.
4 in my top 20.
Wow.
That was not something that I expected. I mean, truly, like every time that I would go into one, Oppenheimer included, I did not expect to enjoy it that much because historically I just haven't.
Yes.
And so I was happy to get, something a little bit more diverse in my, my Rolodex here of what I like. And
very good.
Yeah, biopics came through for me this year.
Yeah, and I mean, this movie does a good job of not necessarily feeling that much like a biopic. Like, it is fully focused around Oppenheimer, but
yeah,
it is such a grand story. It kind of, I'm assuming Napoleon will not be on your list this year.
Maybe.
Who knows? I won't spoil it. I didn't feel Napoleon was very successful, but it was another huge, like, sprawling biopic. But what separated the two is I felt like with Napoleon, it was getting stretched so thin and it just couldn't quite hold on anymore. Like, a lot of the threads don't quite work. It loses a lot of the heartbeat of the movie with the central figures that Napoleon presents. But I didn't feel any of that with Oppenheimer. I felt like every character, even the women, were just as fleshed out as they needed to be. The women in this movie aren't written exceptionally. That's not necessarily what Nolan's known for, but they're not necessarily the point of the movie, and so it works.
Someone say he's known for not doing it well.
Yes. But yeah, the 7 for me is Oppenheimer.
Number
Loved
6.
That's available to rent wherever. I'm not sure where it's going to be available, but you can rent it now on Prime and Apple TV. Sorry, Brett. Go ahead with your number 6.
One more with those, and I'm gonna walk off the set. I'm done.
Oh dear.
You interrupt me again.
Won't happen.
Number 6 for me is the Iron Claw.
Number 6 for me is the Iron Claw.
Wow, we should hold hands after this. So
we can hold hands now.
Oh, so nice. Sean Durkin's feel good to the most heart-wrenching you've ever felt in a movie family drama. From produced by A24. Stars Zac Efron, White Boy of the Month Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, and some more. It's a movie that's still in theaters. Bryce and I just saw it earlier this week. I've been on a run. Both of us have been on a run this week because I'm off work for like 12 days.
I'm off work for months.
For an unknown amount of time. Where we've just both been able to marathon in our AMC, and we didn't get to see, frankly, a lot of really good movies. The Iron Claw was one of them, in my opinion. This is a story about family, masculinity, success, what it means to have it, the consequences of pushing, toxic masculinity, fatherhood, brotherhood. It generally centers around family, but there are a lot of complex themes here that are very relatable in some ways, very not relatable in others. Just kind of the mass scale of this movie. It is about wrestlers, a family, specifically the Von Erichs, who were very notable during their time in the world of wrestling.
In the 80s.
In the 80s. I don't think that you have any kind of like special relationship with wrestling. I don't either.
That was one of the things that I wrote down. I was like, this was another huge shock for me that I like this movie so much. I have zero relationship with professional wrestling. In fact, I hated it most of my childhood because I was like, it's fake. Why do people like it? It's fake. I went most of my life not realizing, everyone knows it's fake. It's still just fun. But yeah, I have no relationship to wrestling at all. And so this coming in at 6 for me is like a huge shock.
Which about the like fakeness of it is something that I'm happy to say was addressed very well in the movie as well. There is a scene that kind of goes over the general line of thinking about wrestling from people who are non-wrestling fans, like the kind of thing that I've thought about in the past and the kind of thing my friends and family, I've had conversations with them about. It does a really good job of making you very invested. The one thing that I remembered about The Iron Claw is that for its runtime, which I want to say is like 2.5 hours, something along those lines, it was probably the movie that I could not feel myself pulling away the most, where there's a couple of other movies this year, even ones that I liked enough to be like in my honorable mentions that are, comparable runtimes, and I would feel myself like gripping for my phone in the middle of the movie theater because I wasn't quite invested enough. The Iron Claw is not that. At every single moment of the movie, I felt was very gripping.
Yes.
Even from like the parts earlier in the movie that are a lot more lighthearted and fun and happy. I loved seeing those, and then kind of as you work farther down the movie, there are parts of it that become very tragic and hard to watch, and I couldn't stop watching those for the opposite reasons because I wanted to see what this storyline was going to be and how this was going to play out. It's a very ubiquitous story in the wrestling community, as I understand it, but it's not one that I was familiar with. I assume you weren't either. But it's one that is certainly going to stick with me. It's an important story that needs to be told. I'm surprised it hasn't had any kind of cinematic representation up until this point, but I've heard from people who are really big wrestling fans say that this is like the best wrestling movie that's ever been made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our theater was full of wrestling fans just based on the conversations that we were hearing in and out of the theater. So that was really cute. Hopefully a lot of movie fans get a chance to check this one out because I truly think that it's like very, very exceptional. Like Brett said, it just like it totally wraps you up in its arms. Like you can't really like pull your mind away from it in a very strange way because this movie is not fun. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know what this movie was about. I just knew it starred Zac Efron looking ridiculous. And it was about WWE, or it's not, but what I thought was WWE, which is inherently a little bit silly and goofy. And that's honestly kind of what I was expecting from this movie, and it is the opposite of that. There's very few moments of levity in this film. It kind of just keeps pounding home how tough these people's lives were, without getting into any spoilers. But like, this movie is about tragedy and repeated tragedy and what that does to a person who is grown up in an environment where they are not allowed to express emotion or express pain or express anything other than the stereotypically masculine traits of strength and stoicism and bravery. And these are things that Brett and I are both very passionate about. I think this could become a core text for masculinity, or specifically like the effect of masculinity in film. I, off the top of my head, cannot think of a movie that I think is more successful at showing the negative repercussions of masculinity. It's certainly a trope that comes up a lot, but that is like at the core of what this movie is. And I think it was very, very effectful. It affected me emotionally. I've thought about it pretty much every day since I've seen it. It looks great, which I think also is sort of what helps, along with just the gripping story, with the gripping writing. It looks awesome, and every frame of this movie is like appealing and pleasant to look at. And it's creative too. Like it doesn't feel like they're just pointing and shooting with a cool filter on. Like it feels like with the production design, that there is intentionality with every single thing in the frame. And so from that perspective, it's excellent. The performances are all really good. This is without a doubt the best Zac Efron performance, in my opinion. Not only is it a great like emotional role that I did not know that he had in him, it's also just an incredible physical performance. I mean, look at the poster for this movie. He is massive. And he uses his size and he uses his strength to great effect in this movie. He's just such a domineering presence, and you can feel why it's so hard for him as this huge, strong, domineering person to feel all of this pain and to be pulled back so much and to be weakened so much. It's really effective.
I often looked at the screen and could not even fathom the way that a human could look like that, especially that guy, that I remembered in like middle school who was playing basketball on TV and singing songs.
Yep.
That skinny boy. It was unbelievable the way that this man looked. And like every lead in this movie is huge. Like it's also ridiculous how big all of the other guys got, but like some of them had less of a transformation than others. Zac Efron just like blew up, man. It looks like somebody put like a tube of air in the guy and just like started pumping him.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
There's some comedy in this movie that was unintentional, in that there's another character in this movie that is shown using performance enhancing drugs, needle injected steroids, in order to get ahead. And we never see that from Zac Efron's character, which is just so funny to me, because the implication that he looks that way without any kind of performance-enhancing drug is ridiculous. But
I'm also glad that
works.
I'm glad that you brought up the other wrestling fans that we saw in the movie theater, because I almost forgot about that. It was so funny. There's a moment where you kind of see Zac Efron's physique for the first time, and it's just like rolls of just mass on this man's body. It's when he's getting out of bed.
Yeah.
And every time that like there's a couple of scenes like back and forth where you see like the bodies of each of these leads that are just jacked, and every single time without fail that one of them would get presented, the guy next to me went, "Oh." and him and his buddy were like clearly talking back and forth during the movie about like, "Oh yeah, like when this happened and when this happened," because they knew the story.
Yes.
And then even funnier was when there was a discus scene, like the Olympic sport discus. And I think that he wasn't aware that was going to be a part of the movie. And it happened on screen and he went, "Discus."
Oh, discus.
I'm not doing it justice, but like internally I lost my mind. It was so funny.
We had a great time at this movie, despite it being horrible.
Something Bryce and I said over and over again was just like dudes rock. And we got a lot of like dudes rock moments.
Definitely a
out of
dudes
this.
rock movie. Yeah. But I'm going to pause real quick. I'm not going to stop recording. I just need a beverage.
All right. Well.
So we're going to keep rolling. I'm going to leave you here with the audience.
Hear all of my typing and sniffling that I do into the microphone, you dirty, dirty little boy. It's your little coffee, little boy. One thing that I really, really like about this like physical setup is being able to have my whole laptop in front of me. It was so cramped in here, having three people lined up.
I agree. All right, we're beveraged up in this big.
One of us got beveraged up. You didn't give me anything.
Some water.
I would love a little sip. Gimme. Thank you.
Alrighty.
I guess that leaves me for my 5, right?
Your number 5, yep.
Well, that would be Oppenheimer.
There it is.
It was killing me not to get to talk about it. It's the first time I think I've had a movie ahead of yours that you talked about. I want to get into it, but we won't stick on it long because we obviously. The only thing that I was holding back from saying that I wanted to talk about on my portion of talking about Oppenheimer is the final act of the movie, where it becomes a like courtroom drama, is like the most controversial part because tonally it's like a completely different movie than the rest of the movie. Very polarizing from what I've heard from critics. I loved it. I thought that it was like genuinely one of the better parts of the movie. There was so much to like chew on what was happening. And I found it fascinating, just like this whole kind of back room, back and forth politics of this like phenomenon. It's like the one part of this whole story that I felt like I really didn't know at all.
That's a great point.
I was not aware of any of this and got to really enjoy like, oh my God, like what's going to happen next? How is this going to have a play on the rest of the story? And how is this going to piece together to like fit a full narrative? I didn't even really know what happened to the man, J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Other than that he made the bomb.
Like it gets into the aftermath of like how had these moments were consequential on his own like life from like a litigation standpoint.
Yeah.
I thought that it was all fascinating. I thought that it was like expertly done by Chris Nolan, and frankly just gets too much hate in my opinion. It's ridiculous that people get so upset about how this was part of the movie because it is like an important part of the narrative that I think needs to be said, and I just want people to like appreciate how expertly it was actually done rather than being upset that like it maybe doesn't feel like it quite fits in the movie for them. Like I understand where people come from. I wish you'd like see a little bit past that and get some more appreciation for like the work that this does.
Yeah, in some ways I feel like it is Oppenheimer would not have had even remotely the amount of success that it had had it not been for Barbie. But comparing the two, I also think has kind of hurt Oppenheimer a little bit. Because Barbie is so pop. It's so easy to sit down and enjoy for anyone. You compare that to the 3+ hour epic, sprawling, sometimes rather, I was going to say slow paced, but the movie is not really slow paced, but this huge story where maybe it asks a little bit more of its audience in terms of like how much effort you have to put in to follow along. Comparing that to Barbie, I think has hurt its image a little bit just because there are so many people that saw this movie, maybe just because they were going to see both, and it's like you compare it and it's like this over here is so easy and fun to watch, and this over here can maybe drag a little bit. I think on its own though, and I've yet to watch it, not in the theaters, not right. Did we watch it before Barbie?
We watched it before Barbie, yes.
Yeah, not having seen it right before Barbie. So it's entirely possible my opinion on this changes. The thing that Brett was mentioning, the whole latter half of the movie, I still loved. I agree wholeheartedly. It was still very exceptionally done. He does a good job of making sure that there is pace and there's energy to every single conversation in this movie. I just found if you're splitting this movie up into two main acts, like you have before the atom bomb going off and then after, I found the former half a little bit more compelling, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I mean, it was my 7th favorite movie of the year. Excuse me, I have hiccups. Without a doubt, I think it deserves to be there for you. I think it's a great movie, and I'm glad to see that you liked it even more than I did.
I believe that brings you to your number 5, sir.
Alrighty, my number 5 is a movie that hopefully people take this recommendation and check it out. Hopefully you take this recommendation and check it out because you have not seen it either. This is the newest movie from director Daniel Goldhaber, the director of Cam. This is How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Yeah, ever since we talked about this initially, I've been really wanting to go see it.
Yeah, so I had no familiarity with this director. I did not see Cam, even though that's what he's kind of known for. I think that's a horror movie. I'm honestly not even sure. But I had no idea what to expect from this movie. I just saw that somebody had it in their top 5, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll check that out. I've got some time. not kidding. I thought this was a documentary for the first 20 minutes of the movie because it's almost shot in that way. Like, this feels very, very visceral. It feels very real. It does not feel like anyone is acting in this movie, which is especially impressive because none of them are actors that I have any level of familiarity with. There's a whole cast of people in this movie that I've never seen before, which I actually think helps. Again, it really makes it feel like this is a real movie. I try to stay off of my phone a ton when I'm watching movies at home because I want to stay engaged, but I had to pause it 20 minutes in to be like, is this real? Because I was not sure. It's not. Knocked my socks off, though. How to Blow Up a Pipeline follows a group of people from all walks of life. I'll just wait until you're done in case there's any
Nope.
kicking.
I was expertly moving.
You did very well. Yeah. You did very well. How to Blow Up a... Go ahead.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, all right. How to Blow Up a Pipeline follows a group of people from all walks of life as they attempt to commit an act of eco-terrorism.
Let's go.
It's basically just a heist movie. If you've seen heist movies before, like Ocean's 11, it's a lot like that. The whole movie from start to finish is the planning and execution of this big thing, except rather than a bank robbery, it's an act of eco-terrorism. They're blowing up a pipeline. That is not a spoiler, though. It is in the title. It is in the title. The tension in this movie is off the charts. It's what makes this movie worth watching. I have not seen many movies in my entire life that are as thrilling as this movie. It's got some, frankly, really creative writing. The dialogue is not at the forefront of this movie. It's not the point. But it does a really good job of piecing together all of these individuals' lives and showing you, like I mentioned, all these people are from different walks of life. I'm not even convinced they're all liberals, but it shows like how each person might get driven to the extreme, like past the point of just like, I'm going to donate money to save the environment, I'm going to recycle, but to commit an act of terrorism. It shows through these like tiny little snippets of dialogue how these people, or who these people are and how they got there. It's very, very impressive. There's some awesome camera work in this movie. I think largely the camera work, a lot of it's on filmed on hand camera. I think a lot of that is the reason why this movie is as tense as it is. It makes every single scene like thrilling because you are in there with these people. You are in this dangerous situation that they are in, and you are just as unsure about the result of every action of this movie as the people in it are. And I found that really, really compelling. It's one of the most intense movies I've seen probably in my whole life. It had my shit puckered the entire length of the movie.
That's a crazy way to say that, but go off.
But yeah, if you like action movies at all, if you like thrilling movies, if you like suspenseful movies at all, I highly, highly recommend How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Probably went under a lot of people's radars. I don't expect it to get any nominations this year because it's a genre movie. So yeah, if you get a chance, check it out. It's streaming on Hulu for free as long as you have Hulu. Highly recommend How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Yeah. My number 5 of the year.
I'm really excited to see it at some point, especially like in the last couple of years. I feel like a lot of people have gone through a little bit of a transformation mentally, in like headspace where politics lies in kind of the importance of your life. Especially because we live in times where like information is as accessible as possible in a lot of ways for us as compared to how it ever has been before. And maybe this is just me getting older as opposed to like the general landscape of politics, but it feels that what is happening on a global scale or on a domestic political scale has more of a tangible impact on our own individual lives. When you think about the economy, COVID's a great example. Climate extremism. It's all very relevant to our lives now, whether we like it or not. And so I like to know that film as a medium has some kind of impact on that climate, because it's an important art form. It's an important art form. It's one that deserves respect. It's one that should be considered to be important and have any kind of real impact. I don't know that How to Blow Up a Pipeline is going to be one that, people are going to remember for years down the road, but I like to imagine that it's able to kind of set a framework for, political activism and how that could be successful in the film industry as a topic, and to be like actually impactful in like a real world sense. Like, art is the center of culture, generally speaking, and in the last couple of years, like, I have felt film becoming more and more important. Like, it has gone through like it has gone through a time of not being quite at the forefront. And I have felt that like in 2023 specifically, like I know that more people are talking about movies than they have in recent times. And I'd like to think that that kind of sets the pace for where it can sit in the zeitgeist, right?
Yes.
And so I'm really hopeful in that regard for what it could be, and I'm really excited to see How to Blow Up a Pipeline later on.
A lot of people were talking this year about Leave the World Behind, Netflix's newest movie. It came out, or not newest movie, but it was a hit Netflix movie that came out just several weeks ago. And it's about, I would say, adjacent topics in terms of like apocalyptic, end of the world anxiety type ideas. If you were interested at all in that, I would urge you to watch How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Brett, you mentioned something about like how things are starting to feel almost smaller scale with the economy. Like, you can actually feel now the repercussions of certain things that are happening. And that's really what this movie is about. Like, it does such, I didn't even mention like all of these characters I found myself like very emotionally invested in, because it does such a good job of showing like how these things that are completely outside of our control, which, if you didn't know this, the environment changing is largely outside of an individual's control, how that loss of control has negatively affected so many people. And I found myself like pretty emotional in my connection to these characters. And I'll just be honest, this movie low-key promotes eco-terrorism. I'm not going to sit here and do that, but I will say the world is dying and drastic action needs to happen if our children are going to have a world to live in. So yeah, this movie is as prescient, in my opinion, as any movie can be this year. It is, without a doubt, in my opinion, the most important subject matter that a movie could be about, that people could get on board with. And so, yeah, I've spoken a lot about this. Brett, you managed to speak a good bit about it without seeing it. So we're going to move on.
All because of the great insights that you've given me about the movie.
Thank you.
Couldn't do it without you.
Brett, what is your number 4 of the year?
In lighter topics, we're getting into some like good stuff. Like this part of the list I'm very excited to talk about, because like truly any of the movies that I'm talking about from this point forward could have been my number 1, genuinely.
Oh, I was actually going to ask that when we got to your number 1, like if you had a clear one.
Yeah, there was like some shifting that happened around. Literally any one of these ones could have taken that spot. Like, I feel that viscerally about these movies. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
Let's
is
go.
my number 4 movie.
That's a fist pump.
We did a whole podcast episode about this whenever it came out. But this is the one that I was saying how whenever I got to making the list, it really struck me when I started thinking about the movie, like how important this one actually is to me and how much I like deeply care about this movie. Not just because like the actual narrative of the movie is something that's good or does any one thing particularly well, but because it feels like this kind of renaissance in film and in animation specifically, as well as like superhero as a genre. It is this reformation that is like, to me, so incredible to see. And it's such a breath of fresh air. It's from Joaquim. Sorry, I'm going to mess this up. Joaquim Dos Santos, Justin K. Thompson, and Kemp Powers. Triple Threat directed this movie. It includes performances by Shamik Moore, Haley Steinfeld, Oscar Isaac, Jake Johnson of New Girl fame. We love Jake Johnson. And many more. It's got a crazy stacked cast that I could not even dream about getting all the way into.
I have dreamt about it.
Some people, they have a bigger imagination than I can. I could never even think about it. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is one of the most visually stunning movies that I've ever seen. The animation is, in my opinion, especially when it comes to 2D drawn animation, is like bar none. I've never seen anything like it before.
Yes.
It is completely unique in its art style. And it is a continuation of a coming of age story that in my mind also is exceptional. So this is the second movie in the what we know is to be a trilogy in the Spider-Man series, following Miles Morales, his take on Spider-Man. And it to me is just beyond excellent when it comes to writing and the execution of a film. Unfortunately, as we know, that like there's been some discourse about like working ethics on the animation specifically of this movie. Like we know that the animators were driven really, really hard to make this complete product, and to me, it's like it's a conversation that like deserves its own time. Like it's not something that I think we're really going to get into.
I'm kidding, by the way.
With that being said, it's incredible. Like I said, bar none. I even struggled really to put it into words. Like you just need to see the movie to understand what I mean. Like if you are somebody who appreciates visual art, especially, like that is going to shine through because it in of itself feels like a masterpiece of visual art. It's not just about the narrative, which is also really, really good.
Yes.
Visually, it's second to none. So see it for that reason, even on its own. But I think anybody who hasn't already gotten to the Spider-Man series, even if you're not a superhero fan like me and Bryce, we are not particularly like large Marvel fans or superhero fans.
Yeah,
especially recently. But both of us, I feel really, really like this movie a lot. And it's one that is going to be like, I think down the road, like if I had children, I would, I don't know if that's going to be, on the docket for me, but there's some movies that like, I know, oh, my child has to see this as like understanding what good art is and to have like, a perspective on the kinds of values that I want them to kind of be in the world. I think that Across the Spider-Verse has both of those characteristics in a movie. And lastly, there's like I don't think this is really a spoiler to say, especially at this point. There's a cliffhanger at the end of this movie that a lot of people talked about as like a point of emphasis to say like this is bad. They can suck me because like at any other point in movies, even before like Marvel made everything episodic, this was like completely normal. Like when a movie had or was expected to have more than one movie, like this happened all the time and nobody ever gave it any kind of thought. To be honest with you,
low-key, they could have put the ending of the movie after the credits and people wouldn't have had an issue.
Wouldn't have been a problem.
Because it's like, oh, we expect this crazy cliffhanger here. It was a very frustrating discussion.
I realized as I was like kind of coming up with some thoughts about this list, I genuinely don't know what I had to say the first time that we recorded a podcast in regards to the cliffhanger at the end of this movie. I might have been like on a very different perspective. That guy can suck me. He's an idiot if he thinks that it's really stupid that it comes in. Like there is no reason for that like minute detail about this overall like incredible piece of work to have such like a hanging discouragement over the overall quality of the film. That's all.
So I can suck you because I would say, so initially in my first run through of my top 10 list, or I guess my top 20, I had this movie at number 5, and then I had it at number 4, and then I eventually landed with it just outside my top 10. It was like number 11 or 12.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
And it was largely because of something adjacent to the cliffhanger.
Okay.
I have no real issues with the cliffhanger, but I adored every moment of this movie for the most part. if I only saw it once, realistically, like I feel like if I saw it again, maybe all of my issues would go away and it would be my favorite movie of the year. Like I loved it that much. But this list changes and who knows?
It's hard.
It's hard. My main issue and the reason why it ended up not making my top 10 was I found, at least on my initial watch and my memory of that watch, was it felt like comparing it to like the Fellowship of the Ring, which is not the first time I've brought up Lord of the Rings on this podcast to compare another movie's quality, but from the start to the finish of that movie, and as you near the finish, you can feel these threads kind of coming to a close, and Frodo and Sam like embark on their next journey. And it's still a cliffhanger. Like you're dying to know, okay, where are those two going? But they reach the end of their journey with the Fellowship. They reach the end of like what this movie set out to do. And I found that I didn't quite feel the same way after this movie. I felt a little bit like I had not, seen a complete product. Now, when the next movie comes out, which I'm so excited for, my opinion might change. If I rewatch it, my opinion might change. But in terms of like, if there's a reason why this movie that I loved didn't make my list, that's why. But like I said, I loved it. There's so much to like about this movie. All of the voice acting is incredible. Brett, you talked a lot about how beautiful the art style is. And I think part of what makes it so awesome is it doesn't necessarily have one art style that it sticks to. This movie incorporates like so many different art styles. Like there are whole scenes in this movie that look like they were done in watercolor. Like you can feel the paint dripping out of the screen. And it's really cool visually. The story is one of the more compelling superhero stories I've seen in a very long time. I like the villain of this movie a lot. I loved the first, what was it called? Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
I loved that movie and frankly did not expect this movie to exceed that bar that I had set, and it did. This is without a doubt like top 5 superhero movies for me at this point. So if you didn't get a chance to check it out, definitely do that.
It is streaming on Netflix.
Streaming on Netflix. No reason to not check it out.
We'll set up time for that sucking later.
There we are. That was your number 3?
That was 4.
That was your number 4. So my number 4 is another movie, Brett, unfortunately you have not seen, but that is Justine Trier's new movie out of France, Anatomy of a Fall. This is one of the few foreign movies I've gotten a chance to get my hands on. I know Brett and I both typically watch a lot more foreign movies after the turn of the new year every year because often in Pittsburgh, where we're at, these foreign movies don't even get releases unless they get Oscar nominations. And then if they get Oscar nominations, then the theaters around us will start showing it. But I saw this movie on enough end-of-year lists and saw that it was available for rent on Prime, and I was like, I just have to do this. Didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know what this movie was about. I was familiar with I think it's like the 50s or 60s movie, Anatomy of a Murder.
Is it related?
Not really. It's related in that like Anatomy of a Murder is all about the happenings around this murder and how it happened and the fallout. But this is adjacent. It is about a murder, supposedly. It's about, I'll get into it. So it's a courtroom drama that investigates whether or not a wife killed her husband, and their blind son is the crucial witness in this death. It explores, on the surface, themes of guilt and family, putting a child at the center of this conflict where he is the main voice of truth and objectivity in this horrible accident, supposedly. Really explores a lot of themes of almost like what it's hard to explain, almost like what guilt is, what truth is. This movie is extremely like not even complex because I think you could enjoy this with just a pretty surface level watch through. It is very, very entertaining. It's all about family, love, trust, hurt. The courtroom is like you've seen courtroom dramas before. The really cool thing about a courtroom drama is it has inherently these abilities to draw out these big performances, these big speeches, and it just works well for a movie. That is not it. This movie certainly has it. It has some of the best courtroom scenes I've ever seen. But it only really uses the courtroom as sort of this alternate reality where it can explore what reality is, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm doing the best job I can at explaining it. But this movie is at points brutal. It's at other points beautiful and like tender and soft. In the same way that a lot of our favorite movies of this year have had that contrast.
The Iron Claw.
Like
Notably.
the Iron Claw. Like May December, it's really morally complex in its themes of guilt and making a child make big decisions like this. This movie like broke my heart and also like built it back up again, all in the course of 2 hours. It exceptional performances all across the board. One of the best child performances I've ever seen. One thing that I wrote down, literally, I was so wrapped up in this movie, watching it at home, I did not write any notes down other than this movie milks filmmaking for everything that it's worth. Like every single thing that I love about filmmaking, the way that it combines every art form, this movie utilizes that. Really, really cool music, all within the context of the movie in a way that I've never seen before. So like, there isn't really much of a score for this movie. If you're hearing music, it is probably because a character is also hearing that same music or is also playing that same music. And a lot of the music is imperfect, like imperfect songs played on a piano, but that like dissonance that creates adds to the feeling of like confusion and moral obscurity and pain, but also like beauty that you're feeling throughout the runtime of this movie. It had probably my favorite use of music this year, in what was also probably my favorite opening scene of this year, where there's like this, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's this very happy song, this very like happy-go-lucky song contrasted with some like truly like heartbreaking things. I definitely like need to watch this movie again. I just watched it for the first time a couple weeks ago and I haven't had a chance to rewatch it, but I am kind of struggling to like put my finger on what I loved so much about this movie, but it's exceptional. I highly recommend it. I can't wait to watch it again.
Give me a ring when you do watch it again.
I shall.
I'm upset that I didn't get a chance to see it. I know that I'm going to like it a lot just based off of what I've heard from you about it. Even, I think that when you were watching it at home, I think I was leaving somewhere and or coming back and you were watching it. And I remember just seeing even a few frames of the movie and I was like, oh, I gotta see this. I have a running like end of year, I need to watch this movie before, we make this podcast, and it's on there and I did not get a chance to see it. But I'm excited for whenever I do get to. I think it's going to be pretty exceptional.
Yeah. And like I said, it's just available for rent right now. But a couple bucks, definitely worth it.
So you remember we talked about earlier the controversies of my list and where they're going to be? This is where they start right here.
And not only is this controversial at number 3, right? Had the potential to be your number 1.
Certainly could have been.
I'm dying to know what this is.
Wes Anderson's Asteroid City in the 3 spot.
That's a Brett play. I honestly expected that to be your favorite movie this year.
Yeah, it could have been. I loved the movie so much. I mentioned the first time that we saw it that I had purchased the screenplay of the movie because I really wanted to read just the dialogue that I felt like I didn't have a chance to really take in because I was like appreciating the visuals and trying to get a grasp of like the overall narrative that I couldn't really take in every little piece of dialogue. And I just kind of wanted to but I could tell it was so good. I just wanted to inject it in my veins. So I got the book, as this hardcover screenplay. which I really thoroughly enjoyed. I read it in a couple days and loved every bit of it. Made me really like love the movie even more because I could kind of see like the intricacies of what was being written in the text.
I've never read a screenplay before. I might have to try that out.
I've read like, oh, I like this scene. Let me see this. I have a Steve Carell's relevant because I have a framed screenplay of the dinner party episode of The Office. I found it it's not like a legit like original copy or anything like that, but I thought it was just a cool piece that I found at a yard sale. So it's framed in my room and I've read that. Very cool. It was a weird experience because I don't think you could do that with a lot of other films, but like this movie is in a lot, like I think any Wes Anderson movie would be this way. They're so dialogue heavy. And like everything is so verbalized in a Wes Anderson movie that like it tells a full narrative, as well as like from what I understand, him compared to other filmmakers, like he's very expressive in the screenplays that he writes, as opposed to like other writers will write the screenplay but like leave a lot more up to the directors, their interpretation and how they want to portray it. Obviously, Wes is also directing the movie, so he is like kind of putting every thought to page before he actually gets into the production of the actual movie itself. All that aside, in Asteroid City, Wes Anderson's harder than Wes Anderson's ever Wes Anderson. At like a peak time when everybody's saying like, hey, maybe ease like off the pedal a little bit, and then he just puts it down to the metal.
If anybody was like, hey, Wes, you can only do this one thing, he was like, I'm going to do that one thing even harder.
Even harder than I've ever done.
Yeah.
French Dispatch actually to me is like the most Wes Anderson, and frankly, like I consider myself to be a pretty big Wes fan, and French Dispatch is not one that really sits well with me. Like I don't love that movie. Asteroid City, I feel like is a much more palatable version of like what French Dispatch is. Where like I know that a lot of people really, really like that movie. It's not personally for me, but I feel like what those fans got out of that movie, I feel like I got out of Asteroid City.
Yes.
It's a very warm, uplifting story that is so feel good in a way that like just really hits home for me. That it has made its way into that kind of like comfort watch list that I have of like The Social Network's up there. Boogie Nights is like my favorite movie ever. It's in there. So Asteroid City is in good company, and Brett's kind of his ideal of what a movie should be for my own personal enjoyment. So it's so far up there for me. Like I understand that it is not like the most well crafted or perfectly executed story. Like it among anything else, like it certainly has flaws that I think are very notable. I have a hard time putting my exact finger on why this is, but those flaws like really melt away whenever I watch the movie. Like I can see them, but I look past them instantly.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a huge middle finger to the Wes Anderson haters. He really just he put it right up there, and said, "I'm gonna do me," and I love it for him. It's my new favorite comfort movie, and one that's gonna go down for the ages for Brett.
Love that. Yeah, I dove in headfirst to Wes Anderson at the start of this year because I wanted to get familiar with all of his movies before this one came out. I'm trying to remember. I think with the exception of the 2 stop-motion movies that he had done, I had not seen any of Wes Anderson's movies. But, I mean, this year I watched all of them. He has very quickly become like a top 3 working director for me. Specifically because I think he might have like the lowest floor of any director. Like truly his worst movies are still pretty exceptional in my opinion. Ironically, I think this is probably like bottom tier Wes Anderson for me specifically. But the thing about his movies is they all have like their quality is all there. Like all of them are good. B, I think when his movies do such a good job of like tapping into certain vibes or certain feelings that we all have, and I think he does a really good job of like this movie of his might really connect with you. or this movie of his might really connect with me. And for me, that's like the Darjeeling Limited. That is my favorite Wes Anderson movie, and that is absolutely a hot take, and I know that. But something about the heartbeat of that movie just really connects with me, and so I love seeing that the heartbeat of this movie really connects with you, because I truly think this is an awesome movie. One of the best, probably my favorite cast of the year.
I was gonna say
every single person in this movie is like interesting and fun.
Certainly gets the ensemble award. Jason Schwartzman, ScarJo are like leading the pack as the two front runners, like what I would call the leads. It has Tom Hanks. It has I didn't even write down all of the names. Who was I just talking about from The Office?
Steve Carell.
And among others, like the list is actually ridiculous if you read it.
There are huge names, like 14 people down in the billing for this movie, and that's just because like people know what Wes Anderson produces, and actors want to work with him, so like they'll be there for a day of shooting.
I just want to make this a little bit more tangible. I'm just going to read some of these names: Jason Schwartzman, Scarlett Johansson, Tom Hanks, Jeffrey Wright, Tilda Swinton, Bryan Cranston, Edward Norton, Adrian Brody, Steve Park, Maya Hawke, Steve Carell, Matt Dillon, Willem Dafoe. Like it's I don't even have enough breath.
Yes.
It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, it's awesome. I found this movie adorable. I loved living in this little world. I don't think I was necessarily as compelled by the plot as some people were. And specifically, I felt like it didn't really get into the plot until way late into the movie's runtime. But like, I don't think that will be an issue for everyone. Like, it clearly was not an issue for Brett. So yeah, absolutely check this movie out. Whether or not you have any relationship to Wes Anderson, I don't think it's that important. Because on one hand, like you said, Brett, this definitely is like one of the most Wes Anderson movies he's ever made. But on the other, it's also like really meta. Like it's a story within a story within a story.
Very literally, like it's about infinity.
Yes. And
endlessness.
Yes, and Wes does an exceptional job of like pulling ideas out of that and making you question like, what is the value in this, or why do we do this? Why do we think this way? And I found that all very compelling, and I enjoyed it a lot. This is another one that I definitely want to watch again, because like my initial experience was I loved this movie. I was a little bit confused by how long it took to get into the plot, and then when it kind of did get into the plot, because it starts jumping back and forth in terms of like timelines or levels of this story, I found it just a little bit convoluted. And it's entirely possible, because I loved the experience of watching this movie so much, on a second watch, which I've not given it yet, as those like narratives start to form into like one more cohesive thing for me, it's entirely possible this could jump up in my estimation.
There is a Margot Robbie scene near the end of the movie that she shares with Jason Schwartzman that and I've heard other people say this as well, that legitimately could be like the best scene of the year. It's incredible. It's awesome. And I felt like completely overwhelmed by it. It was one of the like peak moments, maybe even the peak moment that I felt like I really needed to read on paper. You got to read that scene in dialogue.
I will do
in
that.
the book. It is I almost found it more impactful than when I saw it. It's
awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely give it a look.
Very cool. So that was your number 3.
Yes, sir.
My number 3, here it is. I literally wrote, here it is in my notes. This is the only movie that Lasso the Moon has ever done 2 episodes on, because I had so much to say about it, I had to do it twice. This is Beau is Afraid, Ari Aster's 3rd film, following Hereditary and Midsommar. In this movie, you see Ari Aster breaking free from the sort of prestige horror box that he chose to put himself into. And he comes out with Beau is Afraid, one of the weirdest, most fun, most thoughtful, most anxiety-inducing movies I have ever seen.
Can I stop you right there?
Yeah, please.
Fascinating to me that you have it as number 3 because you liked it so much. It's my number 2.
Wow. Okay, that's very exciting. So that'll be the next movie that you talk about, so we can just share it.
We'll loop
Awesome.
it in.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, as you can see behind me, our viewers, I'm sitting in front of a Hereditary and a Midsommar poster. I love Ari Aster's work. I gave the take in our first version of the Beau is Afraid podcast that I am now of the opinion that he has made 3 masterpieces. That is absolutely a hot take, Brett. I'm glad to see you share a love for this movie. Um, all of the elements to this movie that received criticism, I actually loved. It's broken up into 4 parts, and specifically, a lot of people found a specific section of this movie, which is a good 30 minutes of it, to be a complete waste of time. If you've seen this movie, it's sort of this dream fairy tale, almost animated sequence that I actually found extremely compelling. I thought it did a really good job of telling you where these characters are at and where they're going, and what their motivations are. But ultimately, I found this movie to just not be super concerned with telling a traditional movie story, and I appreciated that so much. Hereditary and Midsommar are, while I think they're both exceptional, they sort of use a similar language in terms of horror and movie storytelling, and Ari Aster just swung for the fences with this one, and it really worked for me. I haven't even said what it's about, but if you haven't seen Beau's Afraid, it follows Beau, played by Joaquin Phoenix, who's an extremely anxious man as he embarks on an Odyssey-like adventure to get home to see his mother. And before I go any further, yes, my placement of this movie is very biased. This is a very Bryce-coded movie. I tend to be drawn to more heady, complex, confusing, weird movies. But I just found that this movie did such a good job of putting you in the titular character Beau's shoes. You feel all of the same anxiety that he feels throughout this movie, and you just want him to succeed, but in the same way that you feel when you have anxiety, you feel like it is impossible for him to get out of these situations, because it feels like the entire world is working against you. And this movie does such an exceptional job of capturing this feeling. This is the first year that I have really struggled with anxiety, and I think this movie came out at a pretty important time for me. Specifically, I think the first time we watched this movie, I said that historically I've not been a person that really struggled with anxiety, but as it has been something more and more prescient in my life, I've found myself thinking back to a lot of the ideas that this movie has. And I don't know if it necessarily offers a ray of hope, but it does at least offer me a framework to sort of understand, okay, this is just how this feels for everyone. This is what this is. And it's the first time I've ever seen that really tapped into in a movie. I've never seen a movie that is able to capture these feelings so effectively. And that really worked for me.
I won't talk about how deep or heady it is, because I feel like you've done a good job of covering that topic already.
Sorry, just I do want to note, if you ever go back and listen to my episode where I just go by myself and just analyze a bunch of things in this movie and give opinions, I state all of them this is what it's about. At the end of the day, it's all my interpretation, and I think all of this is open to interpretation, and I love that. So sorry, Brett, go ahead.
This movie's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
It is so funny. It is in that same kind of realm as Poor Things for me this year, where it is just absurdist comedy. And it's very physical, and it is very raw. I think it is more of a raw comedy than Poor Things is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Things actually does, I feel hold back a little bit. This is the most finger on the trigger movie I've seen all year, I think, where it is just so brash in your face about the things that it's trying to say. And it also doesn't pull any punches about being absurd and ridiculous and funny all at the same time. It's probably the most I've laughed in an actual movie theater. And I felt that, if I remember correctly, the theater really liked it as well. And it was one of the best parts about a movie going experience is the community aspect of it. And whenever everybody's in the same page in a movie theater, especially for something that's funny, it's really special to me.
Specifically that second act of the 4 acts, the one with Nathan Lane and Amy Ryan.
Yes.
It's some of the funniest filmmaking I've seen in a non-straight comedy in my whole life, probably. It's
I was
exceptional.
very frustrated because like a while after it had been released, you couldn't stream it or rent it anywhere.
Mhm.
If you wanted to buy it, or if you wanted to watch it, you had to buy it, and it was like $30. And frankly, I wasn't going to do that. Now you can rent it, so I'm really excited to go back and watch it again. Like I didn't realize you could rent it now until I put the list together the other day, and I'm very excited to go back and do that. But again, Beau's Afraid is my second movie on the list. I'm excited to hear what your second movie is because you called this a masterpiece, and so I don't know what the next two are going to be for sure. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I everything that this movie was criticized for, like by the public or by critics, worked for me and was a thing that actually like drew me into this movie. You mentioned you haven't rewatched it. I've watched it 3 times now, all in theaters. And every single time I watched it, I had more that I got out of it. I had completely new ideas about what things might represent, and I had whole new takeaways that made me like think about different aspects of my life and my brain and my relationships and how the world works. Ironically, like one of the biggest messages of this movie is like the relationship between a mother and a son. And how that relationship can sometimes be toxic. And that is not even something that I really relate to. Like those themes in particular, I did not empathize with at all. But there's just so much more going on in this movie that I was able to draw from, that I could not get enough of it. It's now streaming on Showtime or Hulu with the Showtime subscription for free if you have those. And like Brett said, it's easy to rent. So if you haven't checked this one out, highly do recommend it.
So that brings us to your number 2.
My number 2. You ready for this one? Right. I did a little tricksy.
Oh.
My number 2, Poor Things. I lied and said it was an honorable mention.
Man, I was shocked that you said it was an honorable mention, and you know what? I firmly believed it.
Yep.
Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, my second favorite movie of this year is Poor Things, for all of the reasons that Brett stated. I mean, what do you even say about this movie? It's weird. It actually shares like a lot of the reasons why I like Beau's Afraid. I like this movie. They're both pretty Bryce-coded movies in terms of being like pretty metaphorical, pretty weird, pretty silly, but having this like really intelligent intentionality at the center that drives every single decision that happens in the movie. It's certainly like the weirdest coming of age movie I've ever seen. Specifically Emma Stone's character, Bella Baxter. I mean, you start out at what is essentially... Did you talk much about like what this movie is, Brett? I don't know if you actually mentioned the plot synopsis.
No, not as much as I should have.
So I guess
Get after
I can do that. So this is, like Brett said, Yorgos Lanthimos' newest movie. After being brought back to life by a mad scientist played by Willem Dafoe, Bella Baxter, played by Emma Stone, is swept off on an adventure across the world where she learns about life again. So this is like almost Frankenstein-esque. Willem Dafoe's character finds Bella Baxter's nearly dead body and brings her back to life and raises her like a daughter. And you track her from essentially like mental infancy to adulthood, and not just adulthood, but being like a very intelligent, thoughtful, bold, challenging woman. And the path that she gets there with is believable and entertaining. Largely, she does get there when she's swept off her feet by the lawyer played by
Mark Ruffalo.
Mark Ruffalo, in, like Brett said, another exceptional performance. One of my favorites of the year. What else do I have written down here? Super impressive, like Brett mentioned, physical performance. I was watching National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation over the holiday, and there's a lot of physical comedy in that movie, and I was like, it's a shame we don't have this anymore in Hollywood, because when done well, it is very good. And like you said, there's some exceptional physical comedy, especially from Emma Stone in this movie.
It's something that I don't think about when I think about comedies.
Mm-hmm.
And it it was so like apparent to me when I saw the movie. It stood out like a sore thumb. And it was like exceptional how funny it was.
Yes.
Just like the way that you watch like Mark Ruffalo move at certain points. It's just like
hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say that hasn't been said. I mean, this movie has a lot to say about gender norms and society and equality and liberation and autonomy and more. And it's like, this movie feels so... It feels on one hand so tiny because it's like this production design is really unique. Like everything is clearly just like on a stage, like on a sound stage. So on that hand, it feels very small. But on the other, it's like there are so many ideas in this movie that I just cannot wait to dive back into and explore further to see like how Yorgos Lanthimos actually chooses to portray these ideas and figure out what he's trying to say about them, because frankly I haven't figured it all out yet. Like I'm really just feeling these like fingerprints of all of these ideas in a package that I really, really loved. But I have no doubt, like the more I return to this movie, just like Beau's Afraid, the more I'm going to get out of it. It's without a doubt the most unique looking movie of the year. I mean, you can see that in the trailer, like everything looks like a Dr. Seuss movie. It is beautiful. It is gross. It is funny. It is sad. It is everything that I want from a movie. And I highly recommend it. It will eventually be streaming on Hulu, I think, but as of right now, it's still in theaters. So catch it while you have a chance.
Well, that brings us to number one. And last year,
number one,
whenever we had our number one choice, we the three of us, me, Bryce, and Wyatt, all had the same movie, and I think it's pretty evident.
Wow.
That we probably had the same movie here at number one. So
do we want to do it again?
I think we should do it again. We should all say it together.
Oh, this makes me so happy.
You ready? 1, 2. The Super Mario Bros. Movie.
I was so confused by the 1, 2, and then speak countdown that you did. That was a funny joke, and I was so perplexed by your countdown that I was thrown off. Yeah, our number one movie of the year, the Super Mario Brothers movie. Loved it. Yeah, in reality, the number one official Lasso the Moon favorite movie of the year is Killers of the Flower Moon. Woo!
I really thought about saying Super Mario Brothers again, but that horse is beaten to death.
Brett, go ahead.
Killers of the Flower Moon. A certified hitter from our boy Martin Scorsese, features Leonardo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro in featured lead roles. This is if I'm not mistaken, 3-hour, 45-minute film that is nothing short of absolutely electric. I watched this movie with Bryce. We saw it together for the first time. Bryce, I believe, has seen it
just twice.
We should mention the story about what happened.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I completely forgot about this until now. So when Killers of the Flower Moon came out, first of all, it's like been one of, if not the most highly anticipated movies on my end, at least.
Same.
Because we all love Marty here. And it's so exciting that he was going to do this big epic, right? And so me and Bryce have both been so hyped up to go see this movie, where with our schedules, the only like feasible way that we could see it the day that it released was to go to like I think a 9:30. It
was like a
or
9:30 showing,
showing on a weeknight after I had worked all day. And I knew that the runtime was long, but like I was so pumped to see this movie that I did not like pump the brakes at all on that plan, and I just went and saw it. I fell asleep so many times during the movie, where
just off and on.
Off and on, but like missing significant portions of the movie. Like specifically, in the end, there's something that happens that's like very, very important and like cool to see. And
the movie kind of steps outside of itself and acknowledges some bigger things that are not the movie. And Brett woke up in the middle of that.
So it was like I got like transported into a different movie, and it was very disappointing. And we had walked out of the movie together, and like I wasn't as like happy and excited about it as I really wanted to be. So Bryce and I went back to go see it again because he was very insistent. This is like one of the best movies literally ever.
Well, more specifically, I gotta be honest, I forgot Brett had even seen it, because in my head, I was like, Brett did not experience this movie with me, because we didn't have a chance to like really have a conversation about it, and I didn't, as far as I was aware, Brett did not think about it again. I was like, Brett, this movie is so important. It is so good. You need to see it again. So even though we had just seen it like 2 weeks prior, I was like, Brett, we have to see this again.
I'm not even exaggerating. Like, I wanted to cry on the way home because I was so disappointed in the way that the night went. I had been thinking about this movie all year, at least. And then it like the way that I saw it for the first time happened in such an underwhelming fashion. But with that being said, Bryce was so ecstatic about the movie that like I knew that it was, and I think this was going to happen regardless, but I couldn't go on without seeing it again. Like, it was right that I had to go see it again. So I did. And I'm so happy that I did because like the coming away that I had from this movie, like to boil it all down, was that I can't think of this movie as anything less than a masterpiece. It is fantastic. Bryce, you need to talk about it because I know that you have strong feelings.
Yeah, I mean, it's unquestionably my favorite movie of the year, and frankly, probably my favorite movie of the last 4 or 5 years. I have not had a movie that I felt so strongly was an incredible movie, and I've not felt so connected to a movie in a very, very long time. Like, with the exception of like a few of the like all-time great movies from the past that I've found and connected with, like this is the first time I would say like I walked into a movie theater and I experienced a movie that like changed my life, and like immediately stepped its way up onto my ladder of like, these are my core movies, these are my core texts. It feels like Martin Scorsese, again, we've talked about Martin Scorsese. This was a great year for like auteur, huge filmmakers making their next movies. I mean, we talked about Wes Anderson already. We talked about Yorgos Lanthimos already. This is Martin Scorsese, one of my favorite directors. There was a new
Christopher
Nolan movie this year. There was a new The Killer. It was the new David Fincher movie. And it's like, there was a lot to look forward to, and I didn't necessarily feel like all of these directors whom I love created art that would quantify as like some of the greatest work that they have done. And I'm so happy to say like Martin Scorsese in his 80s now made what is, in my opinion, a top 5 movie of his. And I love some of his movies. Goodfellas is one of my favorite. It's like a totem pole movie for me. Goodfellas is like top 4. Wolf of Wall Street is probably top 10, top 15 for me. And this movie feels like the perfect blend of the energy and the vivacity that a movie like Goodfellas or Wolf of Wall Street has, combined with the like reserved, quiet, thoughtful energy that like a Silence from Martin Scorsese has. I mean, it is clear to me that this movie is coming from a great director who has lived his entire life on certain principles that he is now, as a person nearing retirement, nearing, frankly, death, because I'm sure he'll probably just go until he dies. This movie feels like a man grappling with all of the guilt and the ideas that he once professed, or at least propagated. It's a man like questioning all of that. If there was any criticism towards Martin Scorsese's older movies about glorifying toxic masculinity or glorifying violence or glorifying drug use and all of these things, which like I've always been the opinion of, if you just turn on your brain and watch these movies, he's clearly like criticizing all of these ideas. It feels like a man that is like, did I really do that good a job of criticizing these things? It feels like he has so much to say about his role as a man, and specifically like as a white man in the world, that like I've truly never seen a movie that feels as like from somebody's soul as this movie does. And the crazy thing is like somehow apparently this is not going to be his last movie. Somehow there's going to be another one. But if this were to be his last movie, I think it would be an excellent capstone There are just exceptional performances across the board, especially from Lily Gladstone, the female lead in this movie, who I was not familiar with. But Leonardo DiCaprio is also exceptional. Robert De Niro is exceptional. I saw this movie again because I had to. Like, I truly felt like I had to. And I'm glad I got to share that with Brett. I ran the full emotional gambit during this movie's 3.5 hours. That 3.5 hours, it frankly consumes me. It eats me up. It does not bore me. Like, I don't really feel the 3.5 hour runtime in this movie. I truly feel like I could just sit in this movie forever.
I like to put in the perspective of, like, from my experience of just seeing it twice, and 7 hours of my life is kind of unreal. And I like desperately want to give up that 3.5 hours again. It's so good. A lot has been said about the ethics of a white man making a movie about these Native American peoples. It's a story about their culture and some of the tragedies that has occurred to them, things that are really horrible stuff. There's like an overarching conversation here, as well as other controversial topics that we talked about today that like doesn't quite have a place here. But I think that it is worth mentioning that neither Bryce nor myself have like this. We don't have this kind of place in society, in the film industry, in our personal experiences, where we can talk on the perspectives of these marginalized people groups that we have no even hints of experience of understanding of what their life is like. With that being said, I think that Martin Scorsese made this movie with the trust that had been given to him by his production studios is always given him, like, you're Martin Scorsese, you're a savant, just like take our money and make this. It wasn't a huge, like, Killers of the Flower Moon did not make that much money. But he took that like responsibility to make a story that is respectful of these people in the like true tragedy that they experienced. And I feel from a personal perspective, he was excellent at like giving it the reverence that it deserves. If you see the movie for yourself, like, I think that you'll understand the kind of like care that was taken to show like this is a story that needs to be told. This is a story that a lot of people don't know. It's one that I didn't know at all, and now one that I find is like very important to me. Like, it's something that I tell people about all the time. Just because people want to talk to me, and I'm sure you have the same experience. People want to talk to me and you about movies whenever, like, when I go home and I see my family over the holidays. We talk about, hey, Brett, tell me about, like, what are the good movies that are playing right now? And I'm like, do you know what happened to the Osage people?
Yes.
And do you understand, like, the ridiculous thing that occurred? It's incredibly important part of American history, of Native American history. It's something that everybody should see and understand. Like, this is truly something that is, like, bigger than me or Bryce or the podcast, or, like, it truly, like, film. It expands past all those things.
Yes. And what specifically I think the reason why this works, and the reason why I don't think that the criticism of Martin Scorsese telling this story from a perspective that he doesn't have the right to necessarily, I don't think that is a justifiable criticism, because I would argue he's not telling the story from the Osage perspective. I don't think he ever holds anything back. Like, this movie is from Leonardo DiCaprio's perspective. Leonardo DiCaprio is the main character in this movie, and he's a villain. That's not really a spoiler. Like, you learn pretty quickly he's not a great guy, but it is his perspective that we're seeing, because it is Martin Scorsese wrestling with all of his privilege and all of the things that he has experienced his whole life as a privileged person. You see the effect that privilege has on the world around you. And it feels much more conscious than I think a lot of people throwing criticism at this movie are really giving it credit for. And the movie also just like we mentioned earlier, it's not afraid to like take a step back and to be like, hey, let me just tell you, like, these are problems in the world. And yeah, I want to see this movie 5 more times before I really feel like I can do it justice. But yeah, this movie rocked me to my core. I love it so very much.
Well, I suppose that wraps up our list. Good
It
job.
does. Yes. I did want to mention, I do have some honorable mentions that were not mentioned by Brett, that I did just want to shout out. I think a lot of people will be surprised that Past Lives was not on either of our lists. It was like 11 or 12 for me. It just missed out. It's an exceptional movie. It just didn't really connect with me in the way that I think it did a lot of people.
I'm actually surprised you feel that way because I feel similarly.
Mm-hmm.
It's 15 on mine.
Okay, yeah, it's a great movie. The Holdovers, another movie that I adored, just maybe didn't connect with me in the way that I had hoped. Bottoms, probably the funniest movie of the year.
Like a very straight comedy.
Yes.
Which is ironic because it's very gay.
Very gay. I also loved Maestro. Had some pretty big issues with it, but had some of my favorite scenes in movies this year. Really enjoyed Maestro. Just saw The Boy and the Heron yesterday, the newest Hayao Miyazaki Studio Ghibli movie. I think I need to sit with that movie a little bit more. I think I need to see it again. Again, didn't quite connect with me, but I truly did love it. Saltburn, another movie that I had a lot of issues with, but I really did enjoy. David Fincher's The Killer. I watched that one twice and enjoyed it a lot more on the second watch. I actually think it's like a pretty good movie. And then Kelly Reichardt's Showing Up. I think it was a movie that I really enjoyed and maybe just didn't connect with me.
So I had actually almost all of those same movies on my honorable mentions list.
It looks like our top 20 is probably very similar.
Yeah. Creed 3, I think, is worth mentioning.
Creed 3 was like my 21st or 22nd movie.
Yeah, it was one that was like kind of battling for spots in that honorable mentions area.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you hadn't mentioned all those other movies that were in my own honorable mentions, like I probably wouldn't even bring it up. But I did really enjoy Creed 3. I think that's a really good sports movie. Guardians of the Galaxy 3.
Also 21, 22, 23 in my list.
It's down there in the list, but it's so worth mentioning to me. Like I think that it's such a fantastic movie, especially in the like conversation about like Marvel episodic movies and where like what the state of that is, what the future of that holds.
It's truly just like a breath of fresh air from the Marvel fatigue that I've been feeling. It felt completely different tonally to every other Marvel movie I've seen.
Napoleon is in this kind of realm.
Yep.
I consider to be a very flawed movie that has a lot of meh parts of it that it just did not sit right with me. But literally, like, cannot go without saying because of the battle scenes that exist in that movie. It's Ridley Scott. The man knows how to do like a good battle scene. Like some of the most incredible, like, how did they make this happen moments that I've seen in a movie at all this year were in that movie that like was not even close to my top 10.
If you have any like aptitude or favor towards like large scale battle sequences of any kind in a movie, Napoleon had like some of the best I've ever seen in more than one scene. So if that, honestly, like any of these honorable mentions, if you look them up and think, oh, I might like that, like absolutely check them out. These are movies that Brett and I recommend, and you just might like a little bit more than we did.
I have a question for you.
Please.
A retrospective, if you will.
Please.
So we obviously did not do nearly as many podcasts this year on the down the home stretch. If you had any movie that you saw that was new this year that you wish that we would have done a full podcast episode on that we didn't.
I mean, I said specifically that I was going to do a Killers of the Flower Moon episode, and I didn't have the heart to do that one by myself. Saltburn, I think I would have had a lot to say about Saltburn.
I was going to say Saltburn. That movie's so fucking crazy that like me, you, and Wyatt sitting down and talking about it for an hour and a half.
It might still have to happen at some point.
It would have been a lot of fun. Yeah, I agree.
Saltburn might be my answer. Like I said, I actually really did like Saltburn a lot. But even like the issues that I had with it are pretty interesting, I think, and would lead to a good conversation. So who knows? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, Saltburn.
Saltburn?
Yeah, for sure. Like it's like, even though it is so far down there in terms of like what movies I actually liked this year, just the one that I want to sit and talk about that I think would be so much fun is Saltburn for sure.
But yeah, I think that does it for our top 10 movies of 2023. Unless, Brett, you have anything else you want to add?
We did it. I'm ready to watch the Stillers play.
Let's go. Yeah, the Stillers are playing in like 30 minutes probably, so we're going to get out of here. Just want to take one more second before we go to thank you very much, listener. I truly cannot express how much your support means to the both of us, but especially me. Like this is like, this podcast is my baby. I love doing this very much. I love having an opportunity to discuss film and to have a community where other people like actually want to talk about movies with me. I mean, like the whole idea behind this, and it hasn't gone exactly according to plan. Like if it were up to me, this podcast would have blown up and we'd be able to do this and talk about movies all the time. But that wasn't the point. That wasn't why we started it. We just wanted to have an opportunity to grow a community that wants to talk about movies. And I think that we were successful in doing that. Those of you who listen to every single episode, those of you who DM us on Instagram and ask when new episodes are coming out and participate in polls to choose the next movie that we talk about, truly does mean the world. We can't thank you enough. So thank you very much for listening. If this is your first time, follow us at LassoTheMoonPod on Instagram. All of our socials will be in the description for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. We would lasso the moon for you. We hope you would do the same for us. Good night.